Whirlo is a sort of spin-off prequel to Namco's hugely underappreciated Valkyrie series. It was released for the Japanese Super Famicom system in the middle of 1992, and on PAL versions of the SNES that same year. In it, you'll take control of Krino Xandra, or Whirlo as he's known in English regions, the second playable character in the 1989 arcade game Valkyrie no Densetsu, an action-oriented sequel to Valkyrie no Boken, Namco's second Famicom exclusive, released in 1986. We've covered both of those titles extensively on this channel, and we'll be referencing them quite a bit here, so be sure to check out those videos if you've missed them. Basically, the first 8-bit Valkyrie entry is an action-adventure with very light RPG elements. Its successor is a fairly linear shooter with a heavier emphasis on platforming. Whirlo is a Nova Co. Limited developed side-scroller game published by Namco that shakes up the formula yet again, as it now stars the green gummy-like ancillary character from the original Norse-inspired titles in the titular role, a change that I initially thought unnecessary. To be frank, it was a huge turnoff, as I've never really liked this character's visual design, and the change to a side-scrolling platformer just seemed a bit lazy to me. I've always dug the Valkyrie character, and all of these alterations left me pretty bummed. That is, until I put the time in and really started to see what they were going for here. Bottom line, this thing took a while for me to get into, but once it clicked, I became hooked. This isn't your typical action platformer. Whirlo is in a league of its own with an emphasis on pixel-perfect precision and puzzles. It's challenging, engaging, and downright addicting, with a beautifully muted watercolor style and an excellent story, filled with deep moments of melancholy, cheerfulness, and humor. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning. I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation, but Sandra no Daiboken Walkirtu no Dai, or Sandra's Great Adventure, Encounter with the Valkyrie, is a game with a name that has a very literal meaning. This will largely be a spoiler-free review, but Whirlo is a gigantic experience that will have you exploring many different continents and lands as you attempt to find a cure for your ailing son's disease. This game doesn't pull any punches with its narrative. At the beginning, it shows your happy family in a small village in Sandland, which is a rural area of Marvel Land, a world that fans of the series will remember from the other Valkyrie titles. The demon Zona gets released from his seal, and a volcano on Alsandra Mountain erupts, causing Sandland to sink into the ground. The ashes spread across the habitat, which results in the plague. That's right, this lovely little cutesy kids-looking game goes straight up Black Death in the opening moments, with the goddamn dying toddler. This is where you might start wondering if this game is even made for children at all, but it won't take long before you realize that it's probably not, because Whirlo is relentlessly difficult, almost to its detriment. Allow me to do my best at explaining how all of this works, and what I mean by that. Okay, so you're this ugly-looking thing. My wife thinks he's cute, but that only makes me second-guess her tastes. I mean, if this mound is appealing to her, then what in the hell do I look like? Personal feelings aside, Whirlo controls like no other 2D side-scrolling platforming protagonist that I can think of. He is animated super well, but nearly all of his moves have a cooldown, which leaves him super vulnerable for seconds at a time. For instance, after this whirlwind aerial attack, he becomes a mess of green filth on the floor. Miss an enemy with this Scrooge McDuck-like downward thrust? Your pitchfork trident thing gets buried in the ground. Fall from too great a height, and he'll need to recover from what I can only imagine are shattered knees and broken ankles. Whirlo isn't invincible after any of these mishaps. Enemies will kill you quick, and you'll be a puddle of lime-flavored jello in a matter of moments as you attempt to wait it all out. Seconds, people. These animations last seconds. What's more is that you'll need to often be running in order to pull off a lot of the special moves, which feels a bit clunky and unresponsive at first. At the end of the day, the only way you can achieve even a modicum of success is if you don't make any mistakes, like at all, because this green feral fungal fuck can only get hit once before he gets sent back to the beginning of the stage. When the difficulty starts to ramp up in the latter areas, you'll often need to string a bunch of complicated moves together in order to surpass the platforming challenges. One mistake, and you're toast. There are no continues per se, but there is a password tossed out, so you can swiftly return to a stage if you perish. It's not all bad because the developers give you a generous amount of credits to begin your journey, but trust me, you'll be hemorrhaging these things until you've truly come to grips with the way this sack controls. That is, unless you choose to just give up, and to be honest, I can't really blame you if you do. There's a steep learning curve here, and the game pretty much drops you right into the fray. It kicks off feeling like you're playing on the highest difficulty, but if you take the time to truly learn it, things start to feel great, and you might find yourself involved in one of the most rewarding experiences on the entire 16-bit system. Once you begin to get synced up with Whirlo, it gets really fun, and all of those changes to the typical action platformer formula start making a lot more sense. It requires a level of meticulous skill and problem solving normally absent from these kinds of games, and the challenge is addicting enough to keep you wanting to come back for more. At least, that was my experience with the whole production. When all of the components started coming together, I simply couldn't put the controller down. Whirlo is a masterfully crafted oddity of a game that has quickly become one of my favorites on the hardware. It's not perfect though. The yak slab moves around fine and stops on a dime when it comes to hopping, but for some reason turning quickly always gives me trouble. Also, there are a few areas that feel unfairly stacked against the player, with obstacles and or puzzles that require rote memorization, which isn't my cup of tea in any game. These wouldn't be so bad if it didn't track how many attempts you take, and which path you decide to go down. There are quite a few text-driven narrative paths that you can choose from, and another instance where you'll need to pick a direction. Whirlo contains many endings, most of them bad. Seeing the true conclusion involves some practice through trial and error, and while I think the game does a good job through its exposition of guiding you towards the most logical route, it can be tough to see the best final cutscene. Without spoiling anything, it is definitely worth it though, as the story does take a few unexpected twists and turns. Unlike the first two Valkyrie-led entries in the series, this one isn't as easy to fumble through without any knowledge of the Japanese language. Unfortunately, the English version of Whirlo is one of the rarest games on the console, so it costs a pretty penny, and I've had to resort to emulation in order to showcase it here. The Japanese original is far less expensive, so I own that variant, but there are enough text-driven puzzle sequences that make it virtually unplayable after a certain point as a result. One would imagine that you could simply memorize the kanji patterns in order to circumvent the language barrier, but the game often switches the solutions to these narrative-driven obstacles, so it becomes a real challenge. Other than that, the two versions are nearly identical, with the PAL region only seeing minor tweaks here and there. One of the more confusing changes is in the appearance of the chubby bubble-bellied slime himself. In the Japanese alternative, he looks cheerful, but in the other, his eyes have been remodeled to appear more menacing. There also seem to be a few extra tutorial text bubbles in the English translation, but by and large, they are the exact same experiences at the end of the day. The game looks pretty good and can be downright gorgeous at times. All of the characters are animated well and really pop out against the pastel, watercolored style backgrounds. There's a lot of parallax scrolling going on here, and all of the areas feel distinct with an enormous amount of variety and detail. Fans of the series will notice that a few elements from the Valkyrie games appear from time to time. These little nods don't feel contrived or forced in any way, and are always exciting little novelties to stumble upon. They give the entire world a consistent, occupied feel, and a few of them add to the overall lore of the entire franchise. Some are more subtle than others, but they are nice inclusions all around. Typically, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of dialogue in my retro action-adventure titles, but Whirlo tends to balance its heavy-handed chit-chat with a remarkable amount of charm. All of the NPCs are well written with some relatively complex backstories. The narrative definitely isn't as gleefully pleasant as the visuals, as many of the ancillary characters are dealing with a great deal of personal loss, anguish, and other complex emotions that are presented very well throughout. These yarns are woven quite well as you journey in and out of their lives, with little touches of light-hearted humor doled out here and there to offer up a bit of levity. It's not often that I feel touched emotionally by an older game, and what's here is written well, with an almost Grimm's fairy tale type of earnestness. There's a dark veneer that permeates this jaunty-looking package that I really appreciate, and it's all very well told. Hiroshi Ebihara, Norihiko Togashi, and Taro Nakanobu worked on the music this time around, and it's pretty good. Though, personally, the inherent reverb-heavy sounds of the 16-bit Nintendo hardware can leave a lot of the tracks sounding a bit vapid. That thick, driving bass from Hiroyuki Kawada's work on Valkyrie no Densetsu is mostly gone, so a lot of the sampled instruments tend to bleed together in a wall of sound, but compositionally, most of these new tunes work with what's going on in the game. There are a few reworked numbers from the previous entries in the series, so it was thrilling to hear them at certain points, but overall, I just prefer the punchier audio fidelity of the other titles. The There are a plethora of big boss battles, and the majority of them are well designed, with fairly complex patterns to memorize. My personal favorites are the ones that include a certain amount of puzzle solving in order to defeat, and there are a couple that don't require an offensive strategy at all, such as this one that has Whirlo dislodging a giant snowball in order to complete a level. It's a wonderful set piece that is broken up into a few unique sequences that culminate in the green goo getting launched into the air. Almost all of the bosses have a clever gimmick to figure out, and they definitely shake things up quite a bit, as do the majority of the stages themselves, which seamlessly blend puzzle-like segments with action. Whirlo is a well-designed experience from top to bottom that doesn't get repetitive or boring. Sandra's Great Adventure might not have been the Valkyrie sequel I wanted at first, but after a significant amount of time with it, there's no question in my mind that it's one of the best games of the 16-bit console generation. It's a bit tough to get into, and punishingly challenging all around, but I'm glad I stuck with it, and learned how to play it properly, because it's a solid, rewarding experience from start to end. It's unfortunate that it's not more widely available, and that those interested will kinda have to resort to shady means in order to experience it, since an official copy is so pricey, but I really can't recommend it enough for fans of a good challenge. Whirlo is a beautiful little prequel to the Valkyrie series. It really is a shame that Namco seemingly lost interest in this franchise as a whole, but I hope that these videos encourage some of you to give them a shot if you haven't already.